Samuel Dalton had always been a man of quiet habits. His ranch sat on the far edge of the Arizona frontier, a stretch of land where the sun burned hot in the day and the nights were deep and silent. He had chosen this life years ago, after the loss of his family in a harsh winter that claimed his wife and son. Since then, he lived alone, tending to his cattle, fixing fences, and listening to the wind whisper through the mesquite and sagebrush. Solitude was his companion, and he preferred it that way. One afternoon, Samuel rode out along the creek that ran near the southern edge of his property. The water was low and sluggish, reflecting the blinding sun above. He had just finished checking the north pasture and was heading back to his cabin when something unusual caught his eye. A small, hunched shape lay near the edge of the creek, half hidden behind a cluster of rocks. At first he thought it was a piece of discarded clothing, but as he drew closer, he realized it was a child. The boy was no older than 7 or 8. With dark hair matted with dirt and skin sunburned and cracked from exposure, he was curled up tightly, shaking slightly, and there was a dull, vacant look in his eyes. Samuel felt a pang in his chest. He had seen suffering before, but nothing like this so small, so fragile and so alone. Carefully, Samuel dismounted and approached slowly, not wanting to startle the child. "Hey there, little one," he said gently, his voice calm, soft as the wind, through the tall grasses. The boy lifted his head weakly, blinking up at him, and Samuel noticed his lips were cracked, his cheeks hollow from hunger. Samuel reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small piece of bread. He offered it to the boy, who hesitated, then took it in trembling hands. The child ate slowly, as though afraid the food might vanish. Samuel watched silently, waiting until the first crumbs disappeared before he spoke again. "You need water too," he said, pouring a little from his canteen into a shallow dish. The boy drank greedily, spilling some over the edge. Samuel smiled faintly. "That's okay. You're safe now." He didn't know the boy's name. He only knew he couldn't leave him there. The desert could be cruel, especially for a child alone. So Samuel scooped him up gently, carrying him back to the ranch. The boy was light in his arms, but he sagged against Samuel's chest as if he had no strength to resist by the time they reached the cabin. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the horizon in shades of orange and pink. Samuel laid the boy on a blanket near the stove, where warmth and safety could begin to reach him. He prepared a small pot of broth, stirring it slowly, watching the boy's eyes follow every movement. Hunger had left the boy silent, his gaze wary, but Samuel understood the silence. Trust had to be earned. That night, Samuel fed the boy a small portion of broth and placed another blanket around him. He didn't sleep much, keeping an ear open for the faintest sound, any sign that the boy might be frightened or restless. Slowly, little by little, the boy relaxed, though he didn't speak a word. Samuel tried not to overwhelm him. He called him Little One, figuring a name would come when the boy was ready. Over the next 2 days, the boy remained quiet. He followed Samuel's movements around the cabin with wide eyes, occasionally glancing at the chickens pecking outside or the horses resting in the corral. Samuel kept his distance, allowing the child to observe and adjust at his own pace. Each time he offered food, he did so with patience, making sure not to force him. He had learned long ago that kindness was more powerful when it was steady and consistent, rather than sudden or demanding. On the 3rd day, something changed. The boy whispered his name, Chaitan. His voice was soft, almost a breath, but Samuel could hear it clearly. "Chaitan," he repeated gently. "That's a good name. You're safe here, Chaitan." The boy nodded, eyes wide and fearful. But trust had begun to take root. Samuel asked lightly about the child's family, careful not to press too hard. Chaitan's small shoulders trembled as he shook his head. He had been separated from them during a difficult journey across the land, chaotic movement of families and tribes, and now he was alone. Samuel listened quietly, letting him speak only what he could, not rushing the boy or asking more than he was willing to give. By the end of the 3rd day, Chaitan had eaten enough to regain some strength. He was still thin, still fragile, but his cheeks had a faint hint of color, and the alertness in his eyes had returned. He began to explore the cabin slowly, touching the edges of furniture, peeking out the windows at the wide desert that stretched endlessly. Samuel guided him gently, teaching him small chores like filling water dishes for the chickens or stacking firewood for the stove. It was simple work, but it gave Chetan a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging he had not felt in days. Samuel thought the quiet would continue. He had seen many travelers and wanderers come and go, but he had never expected anything beyond this moment of care. Yet the land had its own rhythm, and news traveled silently across the desert, carried by winged birds, and the faintest tracks left in sand. On the morning of the fourth day, as Samuel worked outside repairing a fence that had been damaged by wind, he noticed something unusual. A column of dust stirred in the distance, moving with purpose, almost like a heartbeat across the land. Samuel paused, shading his eyes against the sun, and watched. The movement grew closer, deliberate and unhurried. And Samuel's instincts told him this was no ordinary traveler. Chetan had wandered to the fence line, curious about the stirring dust. His small hand reached for Samuel's, and Samuel took it, squeezing gently. "Stay close, little one," he said. The boy nodded, gripping his hand tightly. The dust settled into shapes that slowly became clear, 3 figures moving together, walking steadily across the sun-baked earth. Samuel squinted, recognizing the traditional dress of Apache women. They moved with confidence, carrying blankets and water pouches, their eyes scanning the land ahead. Samuel's heart skipped. Could they be here for Chetan? He did not know yet. But instinct told him this encounter would change everything. He led Chetan inside the cabin and prepared a small corner for him near the stove, as he had done each night. "Stay here, Chetan. I'll be right back." Samuel moved to the door just as the 3 women approached the edge of the porch. The sunlight caught their faces, revealing sharp, attentive eyes. Their expressions were calm but serious, and Samuel noticed immediately the careful way they measured him and the boy. For a moment, everyone froze. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Chetan peeked around Samuel, recognizing something familiar in the women, a family he had thought lost. One of the women let out a soft, breathy sound and ran forward. Samuel held her back gently at first, unsure of their intentions. Then he realized she meant only to reach her child. Tears welled in her eyes as she knelt, wrapping her arms around Chetan. He clung to her, burying his face in her shoulder. The other 2 women stood nearby, watching carefully, but with a warmth that spoke of relief and hope. Samuel watched quietly, understanding that this was not a confrontation but a reunion. The woman spoke softly in a language Samuel did not understand, but the tone was tender and full of gratitude. She looked up at Samuel, eyes bright. He nodded, not needing words to communicate that he had cared for the boy as best he could. The silent exchange was enough. Gifts were exchanged in the following moments: beads, small dried meats, and a handcrafted knife, symbolic of thanks. Samuel accepted with a quiet nod. He had never sought recognition, but he understood their meaning. Respect and gratitude were important to their people, and he honored it fully. By the end of that day, Chetan had rested again, this time in the comforting embrace of his family. Samuel stayed close, sharing meals and conversation, learning little by little about their needs and routines. The women's presence brought a new rhythm to the ranch, a mix of caution and trust, curiosity and gratitude. Samuel looked at the horizon that evening, the sky painted with streaks of orange and purple, and he felt something stir in his heart. The land had shifted in ways he could not yet name, and the quiet solitude he had known for years was beginning to change. For the first time in a long while, he felt the fragile pull of connection, of life shared, of a story that was only just beginning. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over Samuel Dalton's ranch, casting long, golden rays across the dry Arizona land. Samuel was already awake, tending to the cattle near the corral. The desert air was still cool, and the soft call of distant birds echoed across the open space. Chetan, the young Apache boy Samuel had found 4 days earlier, slept peacefully by the stove in the cabin. For the first time since Samuel had discovered him in the dust, the child seemed fully relaxed. His small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Samuel finished checking the cattle and returned to the cabin. wiping sweat from his brow. As he approached, he noticed something unusual in the distance, a soft movement of dust, like gentle waves rolling across the parched ground. Squinting, he saw 3 figures approaching the ranch slowly but deliberately. Their steps were measured, deliberate, and confident. They were women, dressed in Apache-style clothing, carrying blankets, water pouches, and small bundles that suggested a long journey. Samuel's heart quickened. Could they be searching for Chaitan? He turned to the cabin. Chaitan stirred at the sound of Samuel's voice. "Little one, stay here," Samuel whispered. The boy nodded, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. Samuel led him toward a corner of the cabin, creating a safe space near the stove. "Wait here, Chaitan." "Don't worry. I'll be right back." The boy's small hand gripped his, trembling slightly, and Samuel squeezed it gently. "It's all right. You're safe." Samuel stepped outside just as the women reached the porch. Time seemed to slow. The desert around them was quiet, as if holding its breath for what was about to happen. The women stopped a few feet away, observing carefully. Their eyes were sharp, intelligent, and alert, yet there was no anger or hostility. Samuel could sense their purpose. This was not a casual visit. They had come for the child. The child, Chaitan, peeked from behind Samuel, and his small face lit up. Recognition flashed in his eyes. One of the women gasped softly, then stepped forward. Her movements were urgent but controlled. She knelt down, reaching for Chaitan. Samuel instinctively held her back, unsure of her intentions. "Easy," he said softly. "He's safe. I won't let anything happen to him." The woman paused and looked at Samuel, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of understanding and gratitude. Then she smiled faintly, the tension in her posture easing. She lowered her hands and allowed Samuel to step aside. In an instant, Chaitan ran to her, burying his small face in her shoulder. Tears glistened in the woman's eyes, and Samuel realized she was a close relative, perhaps an aunt or elder sister. The other 2 women remained a few steps behind, their gaze steady, protective. But warmed for several minutes, Chaitan clung to the woman. His tiny arms wrapped around her tightly, as if refusing to let go of the first sense of safety he had known in days. The women spoke softly to each other in their native language, the words flowing in gentle, melodic tones that Samuel could not understand. Yet the meaning was clear: relief, gratitude, and recognition of the bond that had formed between the boy and the rancher. Samuel stepped back, allowing the reunion to take place. He watched quietly, feeling a strange mix of emotions: satisfaction that the boy was with family, and a gentle sadness that his brief days of caring had come to an end. But he also felt pride. He had given Chaitan food, shelter, and safety when no one else could, and it mattered. One of the women, the one holding Chaitan, reached into her bundle and pulled out small gifts: handcrafted beads, dried meat, and a carved wooden figure. She handed them to Samuel with a nod of respect. "For taking care of him," she said softly, in a few words he could understand. Samuel shook his head, refusing to take them. "No, ma'am. I only did what was right. That's all," she insisted gently, placing the gifts on the porch table. Samuel accepted them with a quiet nod. In their culture, he understood, gestures of gratitude were not to be refused. They carried meaning and respect, like symbols of trust and honor that could not be ignored. The women spoke among themselves again, and then one of them turned to Samuel. "We need to know he is safe," she said simply. Samuel nodded. "I promise. He's been well fed, warm, and cared for. He has not been harmed in any way." Her eyes softened slightly. "Good. We trust you." For the rest of the morning, the women observed Samuel and the ranch. They moved cautiously but respectfully, not touching anything without permission, not speaking unless necessary. Samuel could see their curiosity, their careful assessment of the place where Chaitan had found refuge. They watched how he tended to the animals, how he prepared food, and how he interacted with the boy. Each gesture of kindness was noted, silently acknowledged. Chaitan, at first shy, began to explore the porch cautiously. He glanced at Samuel, then at the women, unsure where he belonged. Samuel knelt beside him, placing a hand on his small shoulder. "You can stay with them if you want, little one," he said gently, "but you can also stay here if you feel safe. It's your choice." The boy looked at the women, then back at Samuel. After a moment, he turned and hugged Samuel tightly. "Stay," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Samuel's heart swelled. The boy had bonded with him, and the trust was mutual. He realized that even though the women were his family, Chayton had found another protector here. A man who had saved him when no one else could. The women noticed the hesitation and spoke softly among themselves. Then the woman holding Chatan nodded and said something that Samuel could not fully understand. But the tone was warm and approving. They were willing to let the boy remain temporarily. Recognizing the bond that had grown between him and Samuel, Samuel prepared breakfast for everyone. He cooked eggs, heated bread, and poured hot coffee into cups for the women, who accepted politely. Chayton sat quietly, eating slowly, his small hands trembling with the excitement and nerves of the reunion. The women observed him carefully, smiling softly as he began to regain strength. As the day passed, Samuel and the women shared stories, gestures, and simple communication. Though they spoke different languages, the meaning was clear: respect, gratitude, shared concern for the child's well-being. Samuel learned about the women's journey. Their search for Chaytan had been long and difficult, and they had feared the worst. Samuel listened silently, offering comfort where he could. And the women seemed to recognize the sincerity in his words and actions by midday. The women had settled near the cabin, laying blankets on the porch and arranging their belongings. They did not intrude, but they remained close enough to keep an eye on Chatan. Samuel continued his chores, occasionally glancing at the group, noticing the careful way they interacted with each other and the boy. It was clear that they were not just relatives. They were protectors, a small family unit bound by love and responsibility. Chayton began to relax further, sitting near the stove while Samuel repaired a fence outside. He occasionally glanced toward the women, then back at Samuel. Torn between two worlds, the safety and warmth of the rancher's care and the comforting presence of his family. Samuel understood this quiet struggle. Trust could be formed in days, but bonds ran deeper, rooted in love, care, and shared experience as the afternoon sun climbed high. The women prepared a small meal for the group, offering dried meat and fresh water. Samuel accepted their offering with a nod, understanding the gesture. Chatan ate eagerly, gaining energy with each bite. The women watched him closely, ensuring he was well fed and safe. By evening, Samuel had finished his chores. He called the boy over and handed him a small brush, showing him how to clean the porch floor. Chayton worked carefully, glancing at the women occasionally. They smiled softly, silently approving of Samuel's patience and teaching. The boy laughed quietly when a small cloud of dust floated into the air. Samuel felt a warmth in his chest. The women spoke among themselves again, their voices low and melodic. Samuel could not understand the words, but he could see the emotions: gratitude, respect, and cautious hope. They were impressed by the care Samuel had shown, recognizing that he had not only fed the child, but had nurtured him, provided safety, and earned his trust. As the sun set, the desert turned gold and pink, the sky reflecting the quiet beauty of the land. Chatan sat between Samuel and the woman who had first reached him, holding their hands tightly. Samuel looked at the horizon, realizing that life on this ranch would never be the same. The boy had brought something unexpected into his quiet existence, a sense of connection, a bond of trust, and a reminder that kindness could ripple far beyond a single act. The women remained on the porch that night, settling in with blankets and firewood. Samuel prepared a warm broth for everyone, and they ate together in quiet companionship. No words were needed to express the understanding that had formed among them. Chaytan had found safety. The women had found peace, knowing he was cared for. And Samuel had discovered a new purpose, one that reached beyond solitude and labor, as the stars appeared above. Scattered across the dark desert sky, Samuel felt a calm certainty. The land had shifted, the winds had carried news, lives had intertwined in a way that promised more than any one person could have imagined. Chaytan would remain a part of his life, if only for a short while, and the women's presence brought a sense of trust, community, and connection that Samuel had not felt in years. in the quiet of the night, with fire crackling softly and the boy asleep between. The next morning, the sun rose gently over Samuel Dalton's ranch, spilling light over the open fields and casting long shadows across the cabin porch. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and earth warmed overnight by the desert sun. Chitan, the young Apache boy who had arrived 4 days earlier and captured Samuel's heart, was already awake, peering out at the horizon with curiosity. The 3 Apache women who had appeared at the ranch were stirring as well, tending to small tasks near the cabin, packing blankets, arranging water pouches, and preparing the little bundle of food they had brought with them. Samuel poured water into a cup and stepped outside to greet them. The women acknowledged him with quiet nods. Their presence was respectful, but firm. They were watchful, careful, and protective of the boy. Samuel had come to respect them in return. They were not strangers demanding answers. They were guardians of a child who had been lost and had found safety, if only temporarily, under his roof. Breakfast was simple but nourishing. Samuel prepared eggs, warmed bread over the stove, and poured coffee into the cups for the women. Chitan sat on the porch, a small bowl in his hands, eating eagerly. The women watched him closely, occasionally exchanging words in their native language. Though Samuel could not understand them, the tone was unmistakable: curiosity, warmth, and approval. After breakfast, the women approached Samuel. "We need to know he will remain safe," one of them said in broken English, the words carefully chosen. Samuel nodded, understanding the depth behind the statement. "He will be safe. I promise," he said gently. "I have kept him fed, warm, and protected. Nothing will harm him here." The woman studied him, eyes sharp and searching, then relaxed slightly. "Good, we trust you. But you must understand he is part of our family. You are only temporary." Samuel smiled faintly. "I understand, and I respect that." The rest of the morning was quiet, each person occupied with small tasks. Samuel tended to the animals, fixing a loose fence post, while the boy helped gather firewood. The women sat nearby, watching silently, their hands busy with sewing and preparing dried meat for the day. Despite the distance of their worlds, a subtle rhythm began to form, a quiet dance of cooperation, trust, and shared care. Chitan moved freely between them, picking up small tasks, occasionally glancing at Samuel for reassurance. By midday, the women had completed a small ritual with the boy, braiding his hair slightly, securing it with simple ties, and giving him a small necklace made of beads. Samuel watched, noticing the care and attention in each gesture. These were not merely decorations. They were symbols of identity, protection, and family. Chitan beamed with pride, holding the necklace in his small hands, and Samuel felt a deep sense of connection to the child. Though he had no blood ties, a bond had formed that neither time nor distance could erase. The afternoon brought a change. The women gathered near Samuel and spoke quietly among themselves. Samuel could see the seriousness in their expressions. They were making decisions about the boy's future, about where he would go and what would happen next. Finally, one of the women approached him, her voice calm but firm. "We cannot take him yet. He needs stability. You have given him safety. We wish to continue this with your permission." Samuel looked at Chaitin, who was sitting quietly by the stove, eyes wide but trusting. "If it is what he wants," Samuel said softly, "and if you will return to guide him, I will care for him until then." The women nodded, a shared understanding passing among them. They would leave, yes, but not forever. They would return often, bringing news, gifts, and guidance. Samuel agreed, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders as the sun moved lower in the sky. Samuel and the women worked together to prepare the ranch for the evening. Chaitin helped carry small buckets of water, sweeping the porch floor and feeding the chickens. The women observed, guiding him gently with words of caution and encouragement. Samuel joined in, showing him how to complete each task safely. The boy laughed when he accidentally splashed water on his boots, and one of the women smiled softly, shaking her head. It was a small moment of joy, a simple glimpse of normalcy that seemed miraculous given the chaos of the past days. Dinner was quiet and respectful. The women had prepared some of their own food, which Samuel helped warm over the stove. Chayton ate eagerly, his appetite growing each day. They spoke little, but the words they exchanged carried meaning and comfort. Samuel realized that despite the language barrier, a bond had formed not only between him and the boy, but among all of them. They were learning to communicate through action, care, and shared experience. As night fell, women settled near the cabin, laying out blankets on the porch. Chatan sat between Samuel and the woman who had first reached him, holding both their hands tightly. The boy had grown stronger in the past days, his small frame still fragile, but his spirit resilient. He was learning trust, patience, and care, and he had begun to understand that kindness could come in many forms. Samuel watched him with quiet pride, feeling a warmth in his chest he had not felt in years. The women spoke softly in their language. And though Samuel did not understand the words, he understood the meaning: gratitude, approval. In the beginnings of respect for the rancher who had saved their child, they brought firewood closer, adding to the stove's warmth, and settled in to spend the night. Samuel prepared a small pot of broth for everyone, and they ate together in a quiet rhythm, a family formed from circumstance, trust, and necessity. Over the following days, the routine continued. The women returned each morning with fresh supplies, checking on Chatan and ensuring he was cared for. Samuel taught the boy small chores, guiding him with patience, while the women observed and sometimes helped with advice. The child flourished under their combined care, growing stronger, more confident, and happier with each passing day. He laughed freely, played with the animals, and even helped Samuel with tasks he had never imagined a boy could do. The bond between Samuel and the women grew as well. They learned to trust his judgment, recognizing his genuine care and dedication. He respected their customs, followed their guidance, and treated Chatan with the patience and understanding of a father. In return, the women shared their knowledge, taught small lessons about the land, and offered tokens of gratitude, such as handcrafted beads, small tools, and dried food. These exchanges were more than gifts. They were bridges between two worlds, forms of mutual respect and recognition. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the women approached Samuel with a serious look. "We have found a place for our people to settle," one of them said slowly. "It is not far from here, but it is safe. Chayton will join us soon, but we ask that he remain here with you until the settlement is ready. Can you do this?" Samuel nodded without hesitation. "Ken. He will be safe, and I will care for him every day." The women smiled softly, relief visible on their faces. The following weeks were filled with small joys and quiet work. Chayton helped Samuel tend the ranch, feeding chickens, brushing horses, and fetching water. He laughed with Samuel, learned small lessons about responsibility, and began to understand the value of trust and care. The women visited regularly, guiding him, sharing stories of their people, and teaching him small skills that would serve him in the future. The ranch became a place of learning, safety, and warmth, a sanctuary in the wide, unpredictable desert. By the time the settlement was ready, a bond had been forged that could not easily be broken. Chatan was stronger, healthier, and more confident. He had grown to love both the rancher who saved him and the women who were his family. Samuel realized that this was more than simple care. It was a connection that spanned worlds, built on kindness, trust, and shared experience. When the day came for Chatan to leave for the new settlement, the goodbye was gentle but filled with emotion. The women thanked Samuel deeply, their voices carrying warmth and respect. Chayton hugged Samuel tightly, whispering a small, heartfelt thank you. Samuel held him close, feeling the bond that had formed over those days. "Be brave, Chayton. Remember that you are safe and you are loved," he said softly. As they departed, Samuel watched the three women and the boy disappear into the horizon. The ranch felt quieter without their presence, but Samuel knew the connection would endure. The women had promised to return often, bringing news, guidance, and gifts. Chayton would never forget the man who had saved him from the dust, who had offered him warmth, food, and trust. And Samuel would never forget the boy who had brought life, laughter, and meaning back into his quiet world. That night, Samuel sat by the cabin porch, the stars bright above the wide desert. He reflected on the events of the past week the boy found in the dust, the women who appeared at his door, and the bond that had formed. Life had shifted unexpectedly, bringing connection, responsibility, and the quiet joy of family formed not by blood alone but by care and trust. The wind whispered through the mesquite, carrying the promise of return visits, the laughter of a child, and the soft voices of women who had shown gratitude and kindness. Samuel realized that life, even in the wide, lonely desert, could surprise him with moments of connection that mattered more than solitude. He had given safety to a child, and in return, he had received something priceless, the gift of trust, respect,